Well, for years, Emirati women have outperformed their male counterparts in higher education. In fact, the ratio is over 3.5 women to every male. But after completing their education, too few women are moving on into the workforce. Now, a new study puts the female unemployment rate at almost double the men's. So why are so few Emirati women going on to get the jobs? Well, Dr. Emily Rutledge of UAE University recently presented a study examining the role that parents play in getting their daughters work. Well, she joins us now alongside the Acting Director of the Gender and Public Policy Program at the Mohammed bin Rashid School of Government. Welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Now, I thought this was fascinating. Doctor, I would begin by asking you, now your study that was looking at women, women and men rather, really found that around 3/4 of Emiratis in higher education and women, and yet when it comes to the workforce, only 20% are women. Why do you think that is? Why are we seeing such a big gender gap?
Yes, that's right. I think it's, what we believe to be the case is that unlike their male counterparts, national women are basically facing, a limited job availability really, in terms of that, unlike the men, they're able to go into the police force and the military after graduation. Female Emiratis aren't facing those sorts of opportunities. And as a result of that, the majority of them tend to go into higher education. That doesn't necessarily correspond with them being able to secure employment on graduation, of course. So we do find that to be the case.
And you said a lot of the time it's because some jobs, as you mentioned, potentially the armed forces or similar, those jobs could be seen as potentially shameful for some women. Tell me about some of those jobs and why they're seen that way.
Well, I think previous research has shown that to be the case, particularly with regard to whether or not a national can secure public sector employment is the issue really. And certainly we found that with our respondents to us, we surveyed 335 Emirati women, and we found that 80% of those women wanted to secure a public sector job on graduating or in a state-owned enterprise. And we think that that is because of a combination of economic and socio-cultural factors, that they prefer the public sector, and also it's considered to be an appropriate sector for women to work in as well.
So certainly having some of those barriers. Gali, I want to bring you in here. What's key to changing that? Do we need to be looking at women's courses or women's studies offered at different years of the school years, right from kindergarten potentially up to when they graduate? Would that change things?
Certainly. Early year interventions is always very impactful. Young boys and girls can be sitting in the same classroom, reading the same book with the same teacher, but still receive a very different education. So basically, curriculum interventions where the curriculum becomes more gender sensitive, where teaching strategies that are adopted are also gender equal, can have a very big impact and can tackle these traditional stereotypes and gender roles that that kids grow up.
Sure. So if we need to have women's courses, should we potentially at the same time have men's courses run alongside them?
Of course, I mean, gender sensitivity is both ways. We cannot say that it's just a women's issue or a men's issue, that's for sure. And when you start with these messages at a very early age, it can go really a long way, because what you learn in school at a young age is what, when you become an adult in society, that really is reflected in who you become. So basically, changing gender biases eventually will make gender biases actually the exception rather than the norm.
Absolutely. I think educate them, teach them right from the get-go.
Exactly.
Doctor, I would ask you, I was very interested about the fact some of your research actually found that when it came to Emiratization targeted jobs, a lot of them were actually very different to what a lot of Emirati women actually wanted. It was quite a striking gap.
That's right. I mean, we set out to determine whether the jobs that been considered to be appropriate for national women were those that national women also found attractive and interesting, and we found that they weren't. For example, we found from our sample that national women preferred jobs in, for example, advertising, marketing, retail, beauty care, for example, as opposed to administrative bureaucratic jobs, and also that included the jobs that have been targeted for emiratization, such as human resources and banking and finance.
Why the gap?
I think that partially there are socio-cultural attitudes that perhaps do act to limit the range of vocations that can be considered acceptable for national women, and that's perhaps pushing them more towards the public sector.
And may I add also, sorry, there's a disconnect. This shows a disconnect between the policies that are being done and what is actually on the ground. So this is why research is so important, and this is why our, we had Dr. Emily present this research, and this is what we do at the school, is try to make sure that the policies that the governments implement are really informed by research that actually speaks to so we don't have this gap.
Absolutely, it's got to be relatable.
Exactly.
In fact, I believe a lot
so
of
we're pushing certain policies in terms of nationalization, yet these are not actually the fields that we need. So this is actually an extremely important finding from their research.
And more needs to be done, I think, in terms of the private sector, in terms of making it more appealing, in terms of work-life balance, and maternity leave provision.
And what about the role of parents in all of this as well? I know that was a big part of your study.
We did find that our research showed that there was a positive influence when there was parental support, and we found that it was interesting to note that for those, if fathers are educated at university, that their daughters be more likely to enter the workforce in the future.
So the father's more of an influence than the mother when it comes to pushing them forward.
Yes, that's right. And also for parents, for respondents, if their parents had worked in the private sector, they were more willing to pursue private sector career paths as well.
So in terms of final recommendations, how do we encourage more Emirati women into the workforce, Galia?
Well, the important thing is to help them with the work-life balance, and I think this is, again, not just an issue for women but also men. The labor market is increasingly globalized here. It's highly competitive, and if systems are not put in place that can support both men and women to balance work and the familial obligations and responsibilities that are put upon us.
Doctor, final thought. In terms of those systems being put in place, I want to pick up on that. Maternity leave, for example, work-life balance. What's your thoughts on that?
Absolutely, I agree with what Galia said, that it's very important that we improve the provision. We have, more institutions providing on-site creches, also breastfeeding facilities as well for women to combine their work with their family responsibilities if they choose to. But I think more importantly as well, fundamentally, the policymakers need to make considerable effort to try to normalise private sector career paths for national women in particular, and to address the fact that this concept that the private sector is predominantly the domain of expatriate workers, but on the other hand, a national job seeker is perceived to having failed if they can't secure a public sector job.